provider. So really focusing on the needs of this provider, we think is a very hard proposition. And that is they're the ones that actually do what's required of them. The next slide. Try to build a customer value proposition around our items. And its story is quite simple, I think, which is build a product. Taiwan or Malaysia, I say, here you go. Build a product that are different to the need. Then you say that so we spent about 3 years working with hundreds of border drivers, developing and designing the one air, right? And it's after 10 or like hundreds of thousands of kilometers that we launched the commercial version of our motorcycle about 2 years ago. And I'm really pleased to say that each time we get feedback from riders, invariably they think we could do better and think we could improve on, but we generally get very positive feedback. It shouldn't be surprising, but it certainly needs to be assuring that that's the feedback we get as the design. And all of that involves not just designing in-house and putting the IP to continue to improve the product performance and the value for our riders, but it's also fundamentally, and I'll speak a little bit more about this later, it's also fundamentally about how we create as much of that value chain in innovation within Africa as we can, right? So as opposed to exporting it to other markets, which invariably we have to believe in the global stuff in the environment. I have a unashamed belief in multi-standard. But despite that, how do you try to retain as much as we can within our But I think as Kenya has done in the global revolution in mobile money payments and digital payments, there's a real opportunity for us to lead a global revolution in the commercial transition from fossil fuel to net. Like I hate we're doing it without government subsidies. I'd like to think with government support, but certainly without government subsidies, purely based on the commercial merits of the equation. And I think we can be a world leader in achieving that. How do we continue to, so today, roughly 5% of the components that go into every one of our water cycles is built here in Kenya. How do we continue to increase that range by developing more and more manufacturing capacity within the market? One job created by any manufacturing business equates to about 20 jobs across the value chain, right? This is 22 times multiplying effect of multiplication that's delivered to local manufacturing. And that's what we're trying to focus on. Let's go to the next slide, please. Is well, vision is self-explanatory. And I think that's not just for Bill, but it is for Bill and for 5 years across the e-mobility industry, right? And that's done by saving our continually. We go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And this second thing, right? This is what accelerates transition from fossil fuel to electric vehicles. If every motorcycle on the road that is electric from day one with the finance model ends up saving our riders 35% of the operating costs. This increases the take-home income by anywhere from 30 to 100%, right? And that's powerful. This is true, I think, for any mobility venture market, and this is the most powerful transition. Next slide, please. And then number 3, as I said, how do we accelerate that transition? The way we've been thinking about it, again, from a local kind of business model that's catered to this environment, is how do you give, and I use my words carefully, how do you give the dignity of choice to our riders? We really think that's a prerequisite to this controversial term on interoperability or convergence, or whatever it is that we're going to call it. Take the choice of the riders, build a product with the right ones, and then develop it, deploy with open architecture, kind of open common standard, children protocols, align across them, and then they choose. As I said, our riders are value sensitive. I have spoken to so many product riders all over the place, and I'm always remarkably reassured about how careful the things are the value equation. That's right. Anyone wants to do this experiment, and I'm willing to bet my bottom dollar. Straight any product with a rider, and they will have thought very carefully about the value equation of that. They will have thought very carefully about what the project was spending on, what the project was charging on, what the project was this model, this cycle. And the other remarkable thing is this has changed in 3 years. I don't come from an engineering or e-mobility background. I joined the industry 2 years ago. When I first joined the industry, I used to ask every product driver that I met, okay, or you delivered something for me. About how does it make you think it's a schema? And half the times I would get a blank look at their face. In 2 years, every product driver I was talking to now, what he tells me about electric motorcycles, but they tell me, here's the wrong bike, this is the project box, here's the bike size, here's the Anderson, here's the Hero bike. I mean, they know, they compare, they calculate. And I think that's remarkable. Like giving them the choice and the ability to do that is powerful. And that's how we think about kind of our opportunities. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of how we feel about this, vis-a-vis kind of the impacts that we have on Kenya, on Africa. What attracted me, I said I was in the industry 2 years ago, what really attracted me to the industry is this is one of the few sectors that I truly, genuinely believe can encompass that people, that profitability, people bottom line, kind of whatever it is that's going to use. I think we can deliver a very, very attractive risk-adjusted return to investors. And I also hold the view that by doing that, it's the only way we can sustainably, on an accelerated basis, scale up the ecosystem. It is by being commercially focused and commercially driven, by delivering a sustainable return to our investment that we can scale up. That is despite, and I talk 100%, despite the shortage and access to capital in this environment, right? For investors that are willing to think about this and spend a little bit of time, I believe that there is a very attractive resource return. And what that enables us to do is, of course, deliver not just macroeconomic benefits. I spoke about the 22 times multiplier that actually has with global creation. But today, our riders are consuming roughly 30 megawatts of electricity every single day. We believe in the next 5 years, our riders are going to be consuming more than 1 gigawatt of electricity every single day. Right? And that's a powerful proposition for our energy generation businesses, for our energy distribution businesses, for clean energy in general. It's a powerful proposition for equal substitution. The Kenyan government equals $600 million worth of petroleum every single month. Like, and they can substitute that through integrated renewable electricity. That's powerful. That's the reason why our policy should be more supportive and continues to be supportive of this ecosystem that is foundation. We are intending to save more than 2 million tons of carbon emissions into the atmosphere within the next 5 years. So the impact on the environment is probably pretty obvious, right? Certified emissions from motorcycles on a per kilometer basis are dependent also within the ESCP elements. It's part of the impact that we have on the climate and the environment. But at a personal level, many generations have been born in important here. As someone who does consider myself a Canadian and an African, at a personal level, the most important part of what I think as an industry we're trying to do resonates the most to me is the impact we apply. All of our consumers are in the lower part of that spectrum. And by reducing 35 to 80% of your total operating costs every single day, we are increasing the take really substantial. Next slide, please. Everybody will recognize the woman I have up there. It was one of our first customers, and I use it to tell a story. I use it to tell a story of the 27 million potential buyers of South Africa. But this wonderful lady is from Indian Yoga. She was one of our first customers. 6 years ago, roughly, she unfortunately became a single mom. Son was at that time 9 years old, he's still in India. And she started delivering to earn a living. And she bought one of our motorcycles from there. And now she paid off a loan facility. And the significant increase this has had on her income is incredible, right? We always use her to narrate stories and examples of the 27 million customers we have across the potential customers we have across the continent, and the powerful impact that we have on their lives. At a personal level, that's more important than profits, it's more important than the environment for the climate, because without that, you don't have profits and you don't have the environment. Definitely. It is saving our riders money so they can take income. And that's how we get the and save the environment. But that's how our investors underneath the most great. Let me stop there and see if there's any pause questions. And then 20 minutes.
Thank you very much. Any question before Rajab? A round of applause for Rajab. So without wasting more time, allow me to introduce our next speaker. Budget presentation. One of the full value of electric mobility in the emerging markets, innovation and global capabilities. Our next speaker is one of Africa's most important mobility innovation programs, bringing research and technology deployment for the scalable solutions. It brings deep expertise in how local manufacturing development can drive competitiveness, affordability, and strong economic outcomes for African. So please help me welcome Andrew device, the right of legal mobility technology innovation program, Nelson Mandela.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and greetings from South Africa. Can you maybe just move about 6 slides, just so that I can see whether this is the updated presentation? Okay, we're good. Let's go back to the beginning. Next slide. As mentioned, I'm Edmund Priest, so I'm the director of the National Electric Mobility Program within South Africa. It is essentially a government program because the primary funder of the program is a government agency. Uhilo means to create, so it's the Xhosa phrase to create. So those are one of the 11, even but 12 official languages now in our country. So to create, and hence the mandate of the program is to create an enabling environment for South Africa's e-mobility ecosystem and its technologies. Next slide. So someone at the Technology Innovation Agency or at the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation 12 years ago had the foresight to establish this particular program. The program is hosted at the Nelson Mandela University, but it is a national program. And as I've already mentioned, the mandate of the program, it obviously supports at the bottom left-hand corner all of those international goals and agendas and agreements, and then nationally within South Africa, it supports the Green Transport Strategy, our EV White Paper, the Just Energy Transition Investment and Implementation Plan, and then the Transport Just Transition Plan. The program essentially has four strategic focus areas, and I'll highlight the aspects that deals with what is relevant to this presentation in terms of boosting the e-mobility sector within emerging markets. So under core strategy 1 speaks of the facilitation and facilitating and enabling advising, which will support the increased uptake of electric mobility vehicles. And this obviously refers to all kinds of electric mobility vehicles. The area I want to point out is the public policy efforts. So there's being a government program and having all the relevant major national government representatives as part of the program steering committee. The program has a strong focus on policy advocacy. Although there's still a lot that needs to be done within South Africa as far as policy and regulation is concerned regarding the e-mobility space, there is now at least some movement around that particular area. For example, there's the 1 billion industrial fund the government has launched. And this one particularly supports the local manufacturing of the EVs and of the batteries, and also projects related to manufacturing efficiency. Then there's the 150% tax rebate that will be launched in March of 2026, specifically that for investment within NEVs, NEV manufacturing assets. And then what's still under consideration is the VAT and customs exemption for EV purchases, and also the import of EV components like your batteries and your your motors and et cetera. The other core strategy, core strategy two, deals more with technology demonstration, right? So there, the program itself being located at a university, there's a lot of applied research and there's a lot of technology demonstration and pilots with industry in order to support the industry and the growth of the industry. Areas of focus is around advanced energy storage, is around smart grid ecosystems. In the next slide, we see some of the facilities that will highlight some of those aspects. And then there's also a lot of research, applied research going on in the area of micro mobility under this particular pillar. Skill development, we know being an emerging sector, it needs to get a lot of attention. So that's also one of the major areas that the program focuses on. And not just skills development for those who work on these particular vehicles, but also those who are interested in innovation, those who are entrepreneurial minded. Now, core strategy 4 is essentially more relevant to the support that is given around SMEs, around innovators and entrepreneurs, and just general enterprise development for the space. And I'll speak more about a Kickstart Fund and then also highlight some areas where we are supporting enterprise development within the area, especially of the energy storage and the battery technologies. Next slide. So these are some of the facilities at the Nelson Mandela University where the program is based. So we've got the only accredited materials and battery testing facility within the country. We've got the batteries group, the energy storage group at the university. We've got the electric vehicle systems group, and then, as I mentioned, bottom left-hand corner, that's what we call our live testing environment, consisting of your solar array, charging stations, second life batteries for storage purposes. So that's where the smart grid testing, development, and demonstration happens. Across from that facility, a number of containers also where some of the battery testing equipment is housed, but also where some of the recycling research work is happening. So around safe dismantling, shredding, neutralizing of these batteries for safe transport to those companies that will then extract some of these valuable minerals. So are those batteries that cannot be used for second life purposes. Okay, and as we know, I mean, the ecosystem is quite broad. There is a lot of moving parts. Hence, you'll also see some of our latest slides, especially under the Kickstart Fund, the variety of projects that we have support to commercialize within the space within South Africa. Next slide. Also just to mention in terms of support to industry and the growth of the sector, the work that we're doing under the recycling, for example, of the batteries, is then to develop protocol that can be then given to industry or any companies that's interested in creating a business, entrepreneurs that's interested in creating a business within the space of the battery recycling. So in terms of enterprise development support, our Kickstart Fund plays a major role. Today, we've supported the 3 projects to the value of about 65 million across South Africa. It is grant funding, being an emerging sector, development finance is a key aspect in terms of boosting this particular sector and getting growth within the sector. So for those of you who are familiar with South Africa, so most of the projects supported has been within the Western Cape, within the Eastern Cape and Gauteng province, one project each in Mpumalanga and KwaZulu-Natal. The central provinces are still some of the major underserved provinces within South Africa as far as electric mobility is concerned. So no support there from the Kickstart Fund, but personally I've been engaging with government officials and other entities in those provinces, setting up MOUs, trying to initiate projects and just getting interest growing around this particular space, so that we can also get enterprise development going as far as electric mobility is concerned within those various provinces. On your right hand side, those are just some examples of some of the SMMEs that we've been supporting in terms of the battery testing. So the testing of lithium batteries or even phase composition analysis of materials, testing of geological samples, performance testing of cells. And it just so happens that there's also a company from Kenya that we've done some capacity both branch performance testing on their particular batteries. Next slide. So here's just some examples of projects that we have supported. Specifically chosen these three examples because the top one that speaks to your products and technologies within the micro-mobility sector. So that's from a company called Struel within South Africa. Struel being the Afrikaans and Dutch word for current. So they have supported them to develop the example e-bike trailer. On the next slide, you will see how this initial small funding to develop this product has moved them quite a long ways. Bottom left, I'm highlighting this particular one because with a feasibility study supported on a premises called the V&A Waterfront in Cape Town. This particular e-mobility initiative is strictly women-owned and strictly women drivers, right? Again, I will highlight the progress that they have made. Bottom right-hand corner, another one of our star projects is the feasibility study that we support with the Golden Arrow bus service. So one of the major bus services in Cape Town. So we supported them also with the study to see whether it make this business sense for them to switch to electric buses. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so I mentioned Struel. So here we can now see some of their sexier models that from where they started from. So this is the new e-car bike trailer. That's what the new bikes look like. This is the newer project that is supported them on to specifically also develop that confidence-based model to your right, top right hand corner. Not just for the local market, but also then for export purposes. I refer to the green tab, and so currently I think within their fleet, they probably now have at least about 15 three-wheelers, and on a rotational basis, they employ approximately 30 female drivers. So Road then Golden Arrow bus services in March of this year, they then officially launched their electric buses. So after the feasibility study, they then signed a contract with the UID to procure 120 electric buses. Today, they've got about 89 of the buses already on the road, and they've got about 25 charging stations running to support those electric buses. Next slide. So this slide just again demonstrates the diversity of projects that has been supported by the program in order to boost the sector from an innovation perspective, from a manufacturing perspective, from a job creation perspective. Top left corner, that's a project by a company in Mpumalanga to support them to develop battery grade manganese sulfate, which they are now exporting very successfully. Supported companies in terms of developing batteries and battery technologies, charging station that, providing from and as a fast charger developed by a company called Microcare, which is the distributor products, of South Africa, bottom left-hand corner, Flex EV, that's the electric minibus taxi that they brought into South Africa. We're supporting them with the project to develop, charging hubs within the Cape Town area. Project supported by EWIS in the motorbike that will go software related project, with to tech within the, let's call it the entertainment or, more recreational, area. They supported them with the development of an electric quad bike and electric trailer. Next slide. As we said, training, skills development is integral to the development of the sector. Support of the sector today we train over 300 individuals, in e-mobility accredited programs, including 140 youth. We've successfully run incubation or acceleration programs, on about 58 entrepreneurs, working around youth entrepreneurs. Also a strong focus on female participants. So at least about 30 to 40% female participation, from each, cohort. Next slide. So this will tend to be my final slide, but it's also then essential with the context of the just energy transition and the just transport transition, that we do not leave our rural communities and our township communities behind as far as this, sector is concerned. We know, I think earlier it was mentioned that Kenya is 80% rural. But in South Africa, most of the provinces is at least about 40% rural. So this is a smart energy solution for Africa project. Kenya was also one of the participants. South Africa was selected as one of the validation sites. So it's a project that provides a living lab consisting of a solar hub of renewable energy, and also that provides internet access to that community. Also that comes with two electric vehicles, one for utility purposes, one for passenger purposes. And in this community was a non-profit organization that took ownership of this particular project. So a project like these for rural communities, for townships, is then also essential in terms of this transition. Lastly, with all of these companies that I've mentioned, or these products and technologies that we develop, I would then also want to acknowledge, because we are looking at intentionally also collaborating across Africa. We're looking at strengthening partnerships across Africa. So let's see where there can be partnerships for collaborative initiative from Little Hero, the program, but also with some of these companies from South Africa that Hero has been supporting. I know Rome Electric is now actively engaged also in South Africa in terms of building their footprint in South Africa itself. I've had some discussions. I visited Rome. Where are we today? Yeah, yesterday. I visited with Hans and Mikel. I think yes. I visited there. I've had some discussions with Stephen McCock, driving products initiative within South Africa. So yes, let's look at where we can partner, where we can work together to really establish a significant industry and a vibrant industry around electric mobility across the continent. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any question for
And please feel free to let us update online.
Thank you. Our next speaker sits at the intersection of sustainability strategy and real world products. She has delivered high value projects across multiple sectors, aligning business goals with environmental and social outcomes while strengthening community engagements. Today, she brings a clear view on how innovating mass scale, climate responsibility, economic inclusion, and strong ESG principles at the center of this conversation. Please welcome Sally Jobu, Strategy Director of Allied Consulting Limited. Yes. Yes.
It's, for the, as you said, that the religion, the stars. And for me, I would say that social impact, is very important in any sense of the. Rest of which is something the probably that are the council. And I'm pretty fun about that, when it comes to. So I intended to about it. That I wanted to address. The quality infrastructure community and looking at what is important to me, is doesn't set a state, but the lens by is not set a state or as what the people. So for me, I always start with the opportunity. Want to communication, want to lead, the infrastructure becomes an outcome of that. And so my first, point was to address community that is mobility solution and what are they? These are human-centered initiatives that actually prioritize specifically present challenges of community. And they are supposed to be intensively supposed to be affordable, accessible, and inclusive. And in every product that we apply here today, I would like to just have a reconsider or whether your product or your service or what your offer is actually affordable, accessible, but thanks. We can go to the next slide, where I was just trying to look at different products that we have in the market and see where they go. And when we're talking about affordable, what is affordable? What can a typical tenant be able to afford? What can a typical South African be able to afford? And where do you fall some of that? And I know every business doesn't look at the alternative budget, which is okay. But again, if you're talking about the bikes, which are the biggest products that you have here in the pool, then are you accessible to the major market? Are you affordable to them? Then are you inclusive? And if you're looking at a typical bike, a man or woman or a child who's able to write questions, right? But the differently able person will be able to. Okay. So we can go to the next slide. This is actually developed from, it's a variation of a tool that was developed in this year that is based on community programs. We find that most community programs together program solution, taking a community and then sort of finding things with playing industries together and then take the initiative. But we're going to use the community to ask them what it is and then create solutions around them. And that's what it looks at essentially what are the needs of the people. are you building trust in the community? The community aware of what you are bringing, to that? And are they physically operating with this community? So, that's the next slide. So I came up with a few principles of equitable and inclusive and that are government. One is the needs of citizens. Really to talk about community and understand what are about what are the and building a product that is the solutions to the problems that exist. Or there is a man, the able child, and able to manifest their use. And affordability and financially objective, any community that's moving forward. So if you're going to a community where affordable is 500, or you're going to a community where affordable is 1,500, to reach to be able to raise the solution you're bringing to that community. Then we have global economic expectation, just as we have the centralized about counties here in Kenya. Then this integrates your solution around every community, in language, in culture, and in how they go about life. Centralized global power, and we will not touch on that. But again, you can be able just accept your state that both communities, then how are you going to want to, for example, charge your batteries? There connectivity there. What supplies the community? And I will go to all of them because something too much. But if you're looking at this is what we need to know about bringing a solution into any community that you are working with. The next slide. It's related to a lot of time, and we'll have to just looking at every I took this as an example from experience of what gaps there are and what we haven't quite figured out. And every country has its own issues. Again, that we fixed on a lot. And this also has this to about, especially with the people who spoke in the morning. There's so many industries that we can be able to put together for different countries in Africa. Okay. Oh, and the next slide. So for sustainable infrastructure design, so how do we integrate renewable energy that we are? Well, so let's see. The next slide. I tried to look at how we can be able to do that. Between technical integration and community integration. And see the differences in terms of scope. So when you're looking at not just looking at the technical integration, but also looking at how communities can be able to take it up. Looking at energy sources, we're looking at how the perspective presented for the sample, showing how other areas are the most connected when it comes to it. And you don't have that infrastructure outside of the urban areas. So if you're looking at the energy source, are you looking at urban spaces, then you have the large utility power, or are you looking at the community in rural and windy, for example? When it comes to circular economy, I feel like it has been pretty overused, especially in urban spaces and communities. Because when you look at rural or outside of Nairobi spaces, we are already doing a lot of projects when it comes to circular economy. We're already recycling, we're already reusing, and we're already innovating different ways to use whatever like put away trash. When you look at planning creation, are you looking at being on the grid, or are you looking at community centers where probably they are ultimately, they have found other solutions to the problem? Are you looking at beneficiaries? Are you looking at the biggest, the main companies that are in expensive areas, or are you looking at local investing in this, and implementation? When you look at decentralization or education of this program now, they are not quite up to par with, or they not work quite well when it comes to people who are outside of the scope of awareness. Because here, for example, like self-screening next year for women, so those people can be able to access that kind of screening. But when you go outside, those who need a solutions, then they do not have that capacity or training. And how do you communicate that to investors and to stakeholders? So to investors, we look at the ESG focus, we look at the environmental capacity, we look at social and stakeholders, we look at governance and risk management. Next slide. And when you look at, first of all, we look at the environmental focus. They look at two things: how do we reduce carbon emission? How do we facilitate circularity? Right? That's the so you're looking at how do we reduce your carbon emission, then how do you use a continue so first of all, how do you reduce the carbon emissions? So you avoid with renewable energy, and you can create a sort of value that's going to communicate to investors. Just an example, what can you be able to say is your value, and how can you use a mention to that? When it comes to carbon emissions, then how can you be able to communicate that value, and how can you be able to put together actions to communicate to investors? And when it comes to the economy, but you won't have that kind of standardization as with carbon emission, and again, you can be able to communicate that. And I like something that Taco have been doing, because the because that the sustainability manager at Taco can actually come together to put on a project that creates those model research where there was no way to at all to the environment. And that was a very innovative thing, and I'm hoping that also people are going to that and sort of use the same thing. And that's the next slide. Then the next focus is really on governance and risk management. So how are you looking, how it is affecting, or need to demonstrate how you're solving problematic goals. This will focus on how you see to people. So right. Even here there will be the gender inclusivity clause, and how are you impacting the environment so we know where it's from. Then of course we have the data now. And how I'm working to keep the data safe when you're using the smart simulation, and what the basic has to internet. And then the ESG integration into compensation, and we have also very specifically how they will be the targets for the and then we're looking at stakeholders, then which is also your social responsibilities. Then you have different frameworks that you can have as a so the charging accessibility index, which was at the GRI 3, and you can be able to communicate that value that way. And communicate about the local population groups. So how you are able to use the framework, be able to communicate. And the rest of it as they follow. We'll be able to share this very and this important to every business, looking at the important so people planners and how able to be communicate what we thinking about the examples to how you can be able to communicate and those be And for me, this was just a bonus. Whenever we talk about industry and we talk about environmental, social and governance, sometimes we keep the economic. And I think in this time, is happening, a priority in a lot of different sectors. We are at a point where technology and all we can build to make life efficient and workable and we are at such a point. And we're coming to a point where my speech starts prioritizing the wellness and the fullness of life. To check on the quality of life values and what can the benefits the quality of life of exactly. And what can the other by progress? It's not work for immobility, but it does work for green energy. What's your reaction to that? And how are you able to show tangible and world values for that? So big community solar ownership is also under great energy, but for the question of this more additional and work for visibility solution. That was the next slide. And then you have what's the resourceful resourceful being how are you able to give what opportunity you get in the different set for future, what value are you producing? So for example, you have 7 line battery capacity which has spoken about. And what is the smart resource we use? So being able to communicate that to more stakeholders and investors, and for this, I'm going to do something some of my alumni from Cambridge was saying. Since anything about you wake up 10, 20 years from now, what are you thinking this is going to look like? If it's going to be getting in your car, probably having a battery at the back where you can recharge your car from anywhere without having to plug it in. Are you going to be living in a home where you wake up in the morning and nature serves you much to some sort of power and energy? Or what kind of life are we going to be living? And it is good that we look at the whole value chain, as you were saying, not just as policies, look at different spots of the value chain, but look at the whole value chain here and be able to see and think long term. So that is excellent. That was the last slide. Thank you. And then, sorry, slide.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Up next is the clean energy and utility finance with the decades of experience and local capital for innovative projects across Africa. Please help me welcome before they out founder CEO Remax Capital.
Thank you. I'm at a disadvantage. Somehow I didn't realize I was getting this talk some hours ago. So I have no slides, but since I'm basically just a pushing worker, I'll try to play for the next 15 minutes just to blow up. A few words about our firm, Remax Capital. We're a fund manager in the off-grid energy mobility space. Our ethos is to try and create financing instruments at the moment that solve for challenges in the finance ecosystem, and that's what we try to do for mobility. In 30 plus years I've been at the helm of Remax, e-mobility in Africa, no kidding, is the most exciting opportunity that we've ever worked on. And we see incredible progress. I'm a e-mobility nerd, and I spent half of 20 days of being in an Uber taxi. So how do I spend my time? I count electric motors. Well, it's not a very scientific method because you can only count so quickly as they're flitting by. And I only travel in one segment of the city. But let's say 3 or 4 times a week, I go between Westwich and Kilmarnock. 20-30 minute commute depending on the traffic. A year ago, I would count 10 to 15 electric motors. In May of this year, I was counting 25 to 30 electric motors. And now I'm counting 65 to 75 electric. Roughly speaking, I think that amounts to about 25% total number of motors that I've seen on the road during this review. Granted, it's the highest concentration of the motors in the city in that quadrant, but still, to me, it's amazing progress that we will have to be really proud of. So, how do we finance this transition? Well, I think that the industry has started to mature over the last few years. We have dreamt up several, let's call them niche financial products to solve for specific challenges. And we didn't get much uptake. The reason we didn't get much uptake is that all the players in the mobility space in East Africa busy developing their IP, developing their assembly facilities, developing their business models and marketing, holding out charging stations, etc. And most importantly, raising money for us to do our environment. But remarkably, today, cadre players, the industry have succeeded in raising not an astronomical, but a substantial sum of capital to deal with the basic financing investments. So now we try to look at the specific niche challenges, and we look at 3 critical financing challenges. First, more political finance. Thank goodness for the asset those now that we need industry right now, but we will know that lending rates at 35 to 70% is not sustainable. The second challenge is supply, financing supply. We've seen again remarkably that supply rather than demand, involved. When talking to the 3 main asset surveying the electromotive sectors, you just getting them. You learned that they had taken deposits for nearly 20,000 loans. They wound up delivering 5,000 a year. That's a supply problem. Why is it a supply problem? Because the companies in the space, even those have raised significant capital, are cash poor. And they're stuck between a rock and a hard place in terms from their OEM suppliers nation, not quite big enough yet. And they can't get terms from the asset because they want takers. Because off-takers are kind of in the market right now. So it means, let's say you have $100,000 in free cash, you can make that deposit to your OEM suppliers and get roughly 100 bikes without batteries over a few months. You have to do custom, you have to assemble, then you deliver and get paid by an off-taker in 30 days. It's no way to scale. So the answer is obvious, right? Trade finance. Problem is that trade finance in Africa for nascent industry is tough, right? So, what's called is publishing financial structure, allow trade finance to happen. And then the third area that needs attention immediately is traditional project finance, charging infrastructure. That the industry has now reached a level of maturity that setting up charging stations, SPV structures, using traditional project finance becomes possible. So what is Greenbank doing? In consumer finance pricing is all about risk, and more function is about risk perception. So what we try to do, Greenbank, is act delta between perceived risk, real risk. Well, I don't want to complete real risk, very real, don't know how to real thing. But risk perception of the commercial lenders is way up here. And it's going to take a while for that to change. People say, look, we have the data that shows blah, blah, blah. Commercial banks aren't that the most risk averse institutions on the planet for good reason, because they're the fiduciary, like deposits, they're heavily regulated. So we want to convince the chief risk officer should lend for anything matter with some ability of visions. They have done it before. You need to do discover 100% of their perceived risk at market entry. You don't do this forever. You have to have a proof of concept, demonstrate that losses this segment are similar to their other business lines. So that means risk mitigation, and we established Greenbank's first loss facility, which provides 20% first loss cover, local lenders, local currency, to motor riders. And our two partners so far, Merchant Credit and Motion EV. Merchant Credit for two dealers, Motion EV. So how does it work? Well, because we are so dramatically reducing risk perspective of the lender, with Fortune Credit are now offering by far lowest lending rates of other products. Fortune is lending 48%, not involved. Now they're lending between 22 and 36%, depending on the risk perception of the company part of it. We've not been down. Some partners is low, some 22%, which is a monumental. Still think it's involved, but it's monumental. With Motion EV, we've done something a little bit different. Motion EV had been taking the first risk of leasing Meta EVs to Uber riders. And we have covered 20% of that lease. After 6 months, when there's a positive payment route demonstrated by Uber drivers, those leases were sold to Caritas Bank. And Caritas doesn't require further risk mitigation. So that's what it takes. It takes 6 months of positive payment and a bank. That's consumer finance. On trade finance, we partner with buy-based trading accounts. We offer pretty account up on to that 100,000 that we will really come at it. So we can top it up anywhere from 2x to 8x, depending on our risk perception. And the risk perception hinges largely on structuring transaction. The structuring of the transaction, trade finance, because remember, trade finance is a temporary fix, bridge finance, right? So as a trade finance here, you don't want to take long-term cash flow risk. But we will take the risk of the supply chain. Knowing that at the end of 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, we have certainty being paid. How do we have certainty being paid? By entering into arrangements with the off-takers. Where instead of, as they do now, by a soft commitment, take 1,000 bikes and have them. A real bankable purchase order, so Berkey only has to think about change the way they interact with the industry. But then it's a bankable purchase order from like the good balance sheet company, the Emerald onto whatever, that we can rely on, that maximum 12 months later. And finally, project finance. So we need long-term financing charging solutions. Project financiers, however, not want to take supply chain risk. So we are partnering with Cross Boundary right now, what you know with the pilot with Ampersand on a sale leaseback basis for some charging stations, battery swap solutions. Because it's a sale leaseback, suddenly we, as a trade unions here, have an offtake. Bankable offtake, the boundary buys the batteries. And they lease them back to Ampersand to run swap stations. That enables us to bank on cross boundaries balance sheets, Ampersand balance sheet, and we can finance. So these are some of the solutions that we're working on. I'm always trying to apply ingenuity to the finance ecosystem. The watchword that we use is there's no real innovation. Right? It's all been done with, but it needs to be applied with this ingenuity, creativity to copy what's been done somewhere else. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you very much, Steve. I think on that note, we'll take a very short break. We prepare some coffee, some stuff, then we can back 15 minutes. So let's take a pretty short break. Then back there 15 minutes. Use this break to interact and network, then we come here, finalize the session. Thank you.
Right. We don't have to go up with it. But, national troubles. When we get on your wedding production, that's what is not only after time, but it's also after you every day. So I don't know who I get when we, but that was that's the first. My name is Joy. I think I know I is this quite a lot of the responsibility for this, isn't it? And I'm not yet to not push out to step, but I'm going to say so I know something will look like. And next slide, please. Thanks. As in terms of the IGC, we have just go to the slide of just to the so we are one of the largest GFIs from the continent, as well as one of the oldest. And we established in 1940, so 2025 October, we just had 85 years. I want to be the South Africa, working to the Southern African development community, but last year we also continue as well. That's why I'm going people to have doing some insight in terms of what's happening in South Africa. Last month, last week, I said about like work here as well. We're trying to see like it's happening there, and also that you move forward as an opportunities where we can assess that development. So in terms of the IEC, we are tasked by South African government to develop industrial capacity. What from the South African industrial application that's going to talk about increasing investment as a percentage as a fraction of the GDP, and also the express rates. In terms of saying that we do not want to see our critical minerals being exported to the rest of the world, but we want to see them separate to the continent to say. There are a few sectors that we prioritize, however, we do probably about other sectors, but we do have those that we consider priority sectors that were noted, and that we will be decided as a priority. Next slide, please. I spoke to the sector, but I don't want to talk about the lower part of that slide, which was brought to my back. That's really we can support entrepreneurs. So any entrepreneur development where in the business, we are here to discuss revenue. I will go to South Africa such a way, because of you, I said the best that with me, but I said this plan one client. So I really have the time to see that that's for the country, but I'm doing it so. We also support companies that are looking at expanding. So we're from startup, however, we can an existing business, but we're looking at expansion and opportunity. That's what this will get more to see. And then typically South Africa as well, and we support the development of tech industries in terms of the end moving to the base of the economy, was that the economy was the first. Just in terms of the facilities that we provide, so we can look at providing a range of financial instruments. I think a number of the previous speakers spoke about it. But we can look at taking breaks in the business. And we look at any business on a case by case basis. So we should not say that we structure appropriate instruments for each business given its particular, given its own specific circumstances. And our thinking is risk based. So we assess the risk in price appropriately in terms of risk. But typically, with a 20 risk, you do not say so you can't find a business you can for each business. Say to us, this is something that we will consider as however, just so we take a problem with us, we will be more to allocate the business. You can also take direct equity business. So sometimes you find early stage businesses who cannot, the business does not have the capacity to take on debt. That's where we can come in terms of equity in the business, but we also don't want to own businesses for a long time. as a to exit, maybe sell to our partners or sell to another investor that is appointed that is willing to take over our stake. However, we know that we started a company called Sasso in South Africa. It's one of our largest playing companies, and we still have 10% share in the company. So the way talking, looking to it's still that, but some of those just and can also provide guarantees on behalf of business investors to learn the response from this institution instead of facing providing physical, gathering solutions, investment that you provide the guarantees on your behalf to a year. That was the segment. So we looked at not only finding ourselves, we looked at finding or finding a partner, might not provide to the finance institution, we also partner with other privileged banks. We also look at entrepreneurs that said also is in the page, opening something this way. And then we say this client value, we typically would then finance grounds from the other partners. And that is German, government grants, that's the benefit entities in the particular sector, and manage that from the others of public government grants. But I think itself, we will program money from the markets and then we will pay our loans and also that for the equities that we like for certain we sell our investment as our development. So we can do more and pay. Next slide, please. I spoke about our private sectors and we the next slide. So I'm looking at the diversity in Miami, one of our private sectors, the automotive side, also one of our private sectors. But as looking up and it's interesting indicators at the point time the abundance of critical minerals that are required for the transition, and we are looking at ensuring that there is some other appreciated within the continent. So when South Africa is studied after abundance of research when it comes to Bangladesh, and some of the highest rate in terms of quality of the minerals that we got. So we not only focus on the production of the iron side as indicated, we also maybe want to see exporting into the rest of the world, but that's a better thing that they appreciate of the quality as well. And then there are quite a number of activity, there's an opportunities that we bring within that some of them are invested in terms of our balance sheet, our total assets, we need such around as we were taking planning for dollars. So asset planning for the management. Next slide. In terms of the debt chain, that's something that obviously we need to economies of scale in terms of trying to say if you want to make that look at this. And for us, I think that's an opportunity that we say, that's something that we can create our mind and look at more of these international audience that could look at setting up short references South Africa, the continent, and then use some of our reserves and to move into not only the paper assembly, which was because we need to just talk about our automotive sector in South Africa. So good energy makers, including electric mobility, as something that's key for us that we're doing. In terms of our investment, we invested in us. If you look at South Africa itself, about 2 meters are mainly used for delivery of goods, as well as food delivery by Checker 66 and development our companies that do this delivery of goods. So we have used them for doing the process at the development of the sector. But there's also opportunities there that we other products that we do have. But a number of the entities that when we start that we talk to us, try to tap into our market as well. When we're looking at the exporting our own and completed 3 units to zero, where they're coming in with a revenue without products, our local development products for the rest of the world. In terms of the future, the market itself, we say attempted instead of finding the opportunities. Currently, the other indications start to the 1.3 million population of India versus Africa at 1.4 million. We look at the automotive sector, India 7.56 million vehicles, the rest of the continent, representing our population is taken about 1 million new vehicles. So it's just the acquiring the usual opportunity in terms of it. Next slide. Just South Africa itself, at the moment, in terms of the OEMs, we've got 7 OEMs that are manufactured in South Africa. We've got 4 that as well as Nissan Navara, and we've got BMW, and then also have that has the X3 or export to the rest of the world. So we set up in South Africa, but the SO almost 1/3 of these vehicles that are manufactured are manufactured in South Africa. So next time when we see cars are going in the world, we'll find the kinds of factory, especially when we have a pickup coming. So when it comes to bikes, that's what I will see that. Everybody is starting to the worst thing about the kind of this programs too. And new energy vehicles, so at the moment, we've got a number of the OEMs that are manufacturing hybrids. So we have the extremely growth here for the service gas. So in terms of food, manufacturing, we are not there yet. If you look at a number of the studies, a number of the students talk about the slowness in terms of us really in terms of our company is software and manufacturing of the new vehicles until something in something so. So protection investments, I just came back from the California. I was in China, the Chinese labor said, but it's not about 20%. The why looking at some of these families to the budget to the instead of just compared to the complete operations and going to the council the better next slide, please. Yeah, so the reason why I'm here is just to talk about what we do on the continent and what we want to do in terms of the continent, in terms of our strategies. If you go to the next slide, we'll learn that we work to the so when it comes to the continent itself, we want the development of the movement change. And some people see that in terms of saying that we do not want to South Africa everything that all the workers in South Africa, improving the country, also manufacturing in some possibility, in South African manufacturing vehicles, but then have them in neighboring country. Also the export in terms of the manufacturing companies. Treatment is export stuff, but some I think East Africa, some idea in West Africa along the line, economy as well as historical that is applied to the so the development of the change or something that's in terms of our I was going to run this purpose. I spoke about how we need to the stabilization and the wider side in terms of ensuring we export high value benefit and super necessary. So we should recognize as not to interpret that investment in this complex equipment that we use to manufacture standards. And we can see on the right hand side of the slide, we just talks about the rest of the world is small and global level, and we can look at Asia in terms of the percentage of global production Africa, we start taking global in terms of the customer 2.7%, and we know that we work on this year, as well as the previous Africa, that talks about identification of the African descent in terms of the and we have constraint within the continent itself. Next slide, please. So in terms of going to some contributing on my presentation, our focus areas And we got our section approved and got our working map started in terms of how we plan our strategy for the rest of the point of view. We're going to look at this in terms of the focus areas. The next slide. So firstly, as I indicated, South Africa development community linked national development. Third, we also we added African expert. Fourth, that in terms of us investment in the sector, we also look at that link to South Africa, but in terms of the we look at 2 African countries that please participate in the sector or having some next slide. I spoke about what's happening in Beijing. I spoke about political when just want to highlight it. When it comes to the automotive side, there was a new energy vehicles. That's something that's talked about at the government. That's South Africa. So we manufacture about 600,000 cars in South Africa. 2/3 of those are exported to the rest of the world. And 75% of those exports are to the EU and UK. And spoke about the UK, internal commercial and sales of internal commercial engine vehicles by 2035. So a big part of our market, if we don't move it with precision, we're going to lose that part of our market. So that's why it's important for us that we move forward, but because of in terms of our priority and select more public services. Next slide. In terms of the transaction approach, in terms of our development, we have development of finance institution. Looking at our mandate, it talks to jobs creation, so that's something that's important to us. So we invest in the business, you say to me that we're going to create a growth and something that I don't think that we want, and including the participation of you. So government is not concerned. But the building with the population, however, most majority of those are with jobs. So I want to bring that into the base of the economy. We also want to ensure that women are also brought into the base of the economy, in terms of our mandate. So I indicated that we look at sharing this with our partners. So we will talk to having spent the game or having strategic equity partners. Ours is not about businesses. We invest with you, the entrepreneur is the business. That's why typically when we take a share in the business, we won't go about 10%. Because we want to owner to be the majority of the business and we convert that seeds. However, we are not going to operation or going to be running with any business. And we also look at neighborhoods for funding alongside and so we find the business sector. We also able to talk to our counterparts inside you are closer to us. We can also participate in investing with us. Yeah, the next slide, please. I just wanted to talk to the companies that we say are priority to us. And so we subjected these companies to say we want to be proactively involved in terms of looking at those companies. So as I said, we look at the rest of the country and we can identify certain opportunities and then we say a specific country would be a country that we prioritize. I think if we look at the first part, our neighboring companies, so we can just do like that. But neighboring companies are all included in there, and then looking at the rest of the southern countries, if we look at the rest of Africa, Ethiopia, as I indicated that I was there 2 months ago, Kenya, I was there in 2022, and our president was in Kenya, and Rwanda, we did our Africa project there, Chicago. So I find that that's the only one that I ended up doing. However, some of our other team members are also looking at this type of thing. However, we do that's what we want to in terms of public support. Not to the next like this. So I just in terms of the number of projects that we are currently looking at and we're trying to develop, not only South Africa, including the rest of the continent. I mean, I don't know, okay, those are companies, but as it's been $3 billion worth of projects that are and looking at very something very premium on the virtual side and pharmaceutical, so it's gonna number of things that we are looking at. So we can also look at in terms of the finding the compare the representative status, where we look at the opportunity to do deeper in terms of the same, what's going to be required to bring the project in place. I think on to the next slide, so that's just an example of one client that I just invested over 226 million dollars into the bank. It's a kind of infection client that's in South Africa that they're doing infection. I was registered for client and progress and security basis as an example of the type of investment that they plan. But as I indicated, when we don't estimate at plus, that can be bring it on my side. The doctor sometimes they are currently looking as well as supplying my credit ability that they're currently assessing those opportunity. But as well, we have to come and see what we can do in so okay, we move on to the next slide. Just want to thank the organizers and the opportunity to present to say that the continent is alive with opportunities and we are here to work together to ensure that we make a success and the continent moves forward. Thanks for having me and you for further engagements in the next 2 weeks. Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir. Any question, John? Thank you very much. We shall continue with that theme now, shifting from manufacturing finance to how we scale electric mobility adoption for the everyday user. Our next speaker has built a career turning bold ideas into practical customer focused business across Africa. And at M-Corporate, he leads one of the fastest growing EV financing platform, helping riders lower costs and increase earning power by switching to electric mobility. Brian, I thought I saw Brian in the Brian. Okay. As we try Brian, I think we'll move to the next speaker so that we can save time. Allow me to introduce Infraco plays a key role in structuring investment of funds and state infra corridors, fully compatible projects. Please join me in welcoming James Wakaba. Senior Asset Manager at Infraco. Yeah, that's okay. Good evening. We have our presentation. Don't want to do the important presentation. Yeah, my name is James. As I said, I work for the private infrastructure development group, called PEACH, of which Infraco is part. Go to the next slide. Just say a word about PEACH. Yeah, we are PEACH is private. Each of those acronyms has important components. Private, not because they're private, they are publicly funded by European governments, but our aim is to attract private investment. So we come in, do our thing, and when private investment comes, we exit. Infrastructure, yes, it's just about infrastructure. I know that's a broad definition,
But we are in energy, we are in transport, we are in mobility, we are in marine transport, we are in logistics, and anything you can come and define to us as infrastructure. As long as it's green and clean, we are in it. We are about finance, we are about getting finance into businesses so that they can multiply and grow. And we are also about climate action. We are driven by climate action in terms of mitigation, in terms of resilience, and anything that is positive for climate and sustainable development. So we look at the sustainable development impact of every project that we engage in, and the higher the score, the greater the possibility of our investments. And we go where it is most needed. We don't go to places where it's not much needed in terms of having participants already. And our suite of solutions is across the green line. At the beginning, we have the incubation stage of projects or businesses where we have a technical assistance arm that can bring in money for early upstream development. Things like security studies, environmental impact assessments, and so on, especially for very underdeveloped projects and countries. Then we have InfraCo, which is where I work, which is the project development arm of BEAD. We help originate projects, we structure them in a way that they can attract financing. We help even with the management, governance and getting the right management in place. And then we invest. As we invest, and this is where I come in at the asset management level, where after financial close, and we help manage business until exits. Our preferred investment method is equity. We also do other equity instruments like the convertible loan notes and agreements. And we aim to get what we call a significant minority. Don't just like our TFI colleagues, we don't want majority positions, but we also want us where we can have a say in the governance of the business as long as our investment is in place. So somewhere around 40% fixed goal, and our ticket size is in the region of 25 million for that stake. Yeah, we also have an investment within InfraCo, which is a larger ticket size, 10 million and above, but for fairly mature businesses, Series B, C, and so on. That forms InfraCo. Then we have the debt solutions. We have the EAAIF, which is the Emerging Africa and Asia Infrastructure Fund. This is for long-term debt solutions, where we give debt in the longer tenures, but at good rates, at very concessional rates. Yeah, ticket size is about 10 billion, but yeah, quite mature businesses. Then we have the guarantee solution, the Garanto, which is the credit guarantee arm. Again, looking at very large ticket size, so we put our facilities in commercial and other banks, and that makes credit more easily available and at better rates. And then we have the local currency credit enhancement solution. So we now have facilities for local currency guarantees. We have InfraCredit that is in Nigeria, so it's in Naira. We have InfraZameen that's in Pakistan, and we have Amana, which is a new one that is in Kenya, Kenya shillings. We hope to extend it to the rest of East Africa. We have a target to have about 7 new credit enhancement facilities that are being developed. Next slide, please. So yeah, let's get started. I think I have that much to say. Cliff said everything that I had to say. So I'll basically fly through it. The only difference that I have some slides, so you can have a basis to ask questions. But yeah, what are we looking at? We're looking at an e-mobility revolution. It's both a transport and an energy revolution. And why is it a revolution? The traditional one that based on petrol is not clean, it's not cheap, it's not safe, it's not data rich, Imagine your car, your current car is not as different as what you get from a mobility solution. And it's also a more, the revolution is more friendly to energy security, because we are reducing our dependence on fuel, on imported fuel, because most African countries import fuel. So it is more energy secure, because you're going to use locally available energy resources. The financing is a challenge, and we'll be talking about this. And the traditional approach for these businesses, even the ones we've invested in, has been to set up everything from scratch and to combine several businesses in one. You have the vehicle itself, most people have had to design the vehicle, have others procure the vehicle the way it happens in the oil industry. They design the vehicle from scratch. That's one business. They are selling the vehicle. That's another business. They are building the charging infrastructure. That's a completely different type of business that fits a different business model, a different funding model. And then the battery itself, again, most people prefer to own the battery, and I know there was a discussion earlier about interoperability. So most people prefer to have their own proprietary business, and that was this level of experience. That has been the experience for the last 5-7 years for all the startups that are in this space. Because most of them went to China, they brought a bike, they also brought a battery, and they put together, and it was in the streets for 3 or 4 weeks, and then it broke down. Because it was not intended for this market. So they went back to the drawing board and started from scratch. And that has presented challenges that we talk about. Infrastructure is capital intensive and it requires long tenure. But it's very, very critical for scale. If you don't have the charging infrastructure across, then your riders will get range anxiety and you'll not get them coming on board. So how would we finance this complex situation and overcome the realities? It's like this. Financing must fit growth bills. Is it corporate finance? Are you financing financing OPEX? Are you financing assets, and what class of assets are you financing? So, for example, battery infrastructure, I said it's high capex, slow payback, but yeah, there is funding that can address that particular class. The revenue model also, one has to be very clear about the revenue model. Most people started with a swap, just a very simple swap basis model, where you charge a fee per swap. People are demanding a little bit more complex ways of funding, especially as you get more institutional type owners of fleet and so on. So the energy as a service. Or fleet subscription, where you pay a fixed amount, and then get the full service. And this works especially for the corporate sector, especially the fleet operator. So they say, I want this service. I want bikes going around servicing Glovo or Uber, and I'm going to pay $300 per bike. And so it's up to the company to arrange its business so that it can provide that. Early utilization risk, you build the infrastructure at a risk, because when you're building it has not been taken up. So we don't have a lot of money coming out of your infrastructure. But you need to build that infrastructure so that you can get more customers on board. And so this brings me to this point about the network, the charging network. It's like we're building, it's like a military. Basically, I mean, because it's energy distribution, and in the end, what you're doing is you're selling energy. So you're building an infrastructure to sell energy. That's what most of these companies are doing. They're not selling anything else but energy. And then the part that is often ignored is the public-private coordination. You do need the grid to bring in the power, and that can become a complex thing. Getting all these points supplied with power. Question of whether you should be paying a domestic tariff or a commercial tariff or an industrial tariff. If you aggregate your whole grid, then it amounts to what would be called an industrial tariff. But that's a negotiation that you have to do with the government and the regulators to get to that point. land, you need land, where do you locate all these charging stations? If you have a complex land ownership scenario in the country that you operate, that can become a challenge that financiers need to see that you have your acts together in terms of the public-private coordination for both land and for the next slide, please. So EVs, and now here we talk about the EV themselves, the vehicle itself, the two-wheeler or three-wheeler, I'm biased for three-wheeler because that's where we invested. So it's got a very short asset life. Its revenue depend on the rider, because if the rider is lazy, then you don't get much revenue. If the rider is active, then the revenue multiplies. So the high credit risk, they are high credit risk, and we'll talk about why it's a high credit risk and reposition. There's a lot of reposition that happens, which is not necessarily a good thing, but there are financials who are familiar with that territory. This is the point that we have to tailor our financing needs, our financing requests to the people who are knowledgeable in financing that class of assets. High reality, especially in Southern Africa, you know, the terrain, you know, the temperature, you know, the right of behavior, all speaks to high reality. So this is financeable mostly via microfinance institutions and also via fintech, especially the payers ecosystem, because the environment is still addressing these characteristics of that asset class. And so short-term tenure capital. Next slide, please. And now, if you look at the characteristics of the infrastructure itself, leave alone the vehicle, it's got obviously a higher life, it's a near utility kind of life. The revenue is based on the throughput, how much are you utilizing the asset, not for how many slots are you doing, or how much charging are you doing for those who are charging. The additional risk is a bit lower. The collateral is better because, you know, especially for bigger lenders, this is infrastructure that can be collateralized for the long term. And so it lends it suitable for DeFi type or infrastructure fund type debts, because that type of debts and sometimes equity from those kinds of institutions lends itself to answering those characteristics of the infrastructure. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just a summary of differences. EVs are consumer assets, infrastructure and utility assets. The EV cash flows are more volatile because again, it depends on the rider behavior. If you see the way for funeral, to leave, the weather changes, so it's quite volatile, the cash flow. But for infra, the cash flow, especially at scale and fair predictable, just like the utility, you know how much money in the power and every year. It's already scaled enough to take care of small changes in individual consumer behavior. And so the different investor types, like I said, NFIs, microfinance institutions, versus DFIs. And when you mix them, and this I think is the whole point of this slide, when you mix these types of investors or when you present your case as one for a company, for a business, for an EV business, you are asking an NFI to behave partly like an EFI. You're asking an EFI to behave partly like an NFI. And this whole mix confuses everybody. It increases the weighted average cost of capital. I think that's a key point of this slide. Next slide. I think I've labored that point long enough, so we can go to the next slide. And this one is basically makes the same points. And again, for the infrastructure, we're giving the characteristics again of the inputs of that sector. The assets are movable and secure. It's not like an EV where the rider can run away and chase more of the town to repossess the collateral. And scale reduces the cost, the marginal costs, and therefore improves profitability. So the higher the scale of your infrastructure, the lower the marginal cost of an extra charge, and so it improves the profitability. And this can actually be structured into asset co, like SPVs. And so a lot of people are starting to think about that. I think I've been making the point a couple of times that you can actually start, you don't have to form separate asset costs or separate asset classes. But you need to refer the financing request, say this is for infrastructure development, this is for vehicles, and this is for operations. And the operations is what we haven't talked about much. The OPEX, you are setting up an operation, you are the one, and you have the software, you have the people on the ground, you have the service crew on the ground. That again requires a different type of finance, which is basically corporate finance. Next slide. Yeah, so actually, with the point I was making, the asset co, you can have an asset co, and then you have the OPEX, the operational company, for the right software. This is your equity type financing, corporate financing, or working capital financing, if you can get it. Riders, if you work with them, you can have the riders pay for everything they can afford. Mostly through MFIs and fintech companies. And this type of business model, which where there is some ring fencing between the asset classes and the financing needs towards the weighted average cost of capital and scales a lot more efficient. Thank you. Well, I know this is my attempt to answer the question that you asked. I asked when I was asked to make a presentation. So that was equity finance. I don't think we need to educate more about debt versus equity financing, but you can have a range of the slides. Next slide. Corporate versus asset finance. I've talked a little bit about it. Corporate finance is based on your balance sheet. But asset finance is can be through project finance or just using the assets themselves as collateral. Usually you end up with a hybrid model. As I say, you can set up SPVs or the various funds finance needs, not only a mass, especially in a small scale. But at the larger scale, that started to relate to. Next slide. Grants, yes, grants play a very important role. Like this, these are attractive grants, not just from ourselves, but from other providers of grants. You know, especially in the early stages when you're developing the product, when you're doing pilots, technical standards, studies, establishing yourself, establishing your corporate governance, mechanism, liability gap funding. We have those cases where people started off well, and then technology let them down, and this was not in their financial model, so they have to go back to the drawing board, and the only way that they could get back on course was through grants, because nobody was going to fund and already funded business that has encountered a new problem. Yeah, and then other things like, for example, integration into the grid, greening the station by operating more renewable energy, for example, solar, getting a better workforce. We've had this big grants to embed a CFO or a CTO or somebody like that to make the company more ready for other investors who would come later and want to see a fully operational management and governance system. And the government also play a role. You can co-locate with some government programs for electrification or for green mobility. Next slide. Funders, this is just an example, and I just particularly wanted to show where we come in. So MFIs, I say the best for riders, fintech again for riders, equity, the initial equity for it can be useful for the initial acquisition of the fleet and the infrastructure. But yeah, they're quite expensive. So you have vendor financing, they are, especially nowadays, there are very many vendors. There are many companies in China, India, and so on who are looking to grow their markets. And so I'm willing to work with the companies, with the incubator companies. That, for example, there's some who are willing to develop DNS systems, new data at their own risk and costs. I've seen even the development of newer models of rights being financed in a way that there's some cooperation between the company and the OEM themselves, because they're looking to improve their sales. I've even seen some Chinese programs now that are funding development because they want to create a market for the products. It's early stage, but yes, there is that is and support and cooperative. They're all there are quite relevant. Next slide. So that's for it. Now for infrastructure, and this is where the PFI is coming, doing ourselves in green there. Climate funds again, we do come in there. There is early stages of the infrastructure. And then the infra funds, we are also there as infra funds and some local banks, especially with guarantees. So, this is where our sister company Garanto comes in. Already, like I mentioned, Garanto is still one can approach Garanto and get working together with the bank. Get an increase in the interest of the bank to lend and lend at better terms. Then, government programs, other grants programs to provide subsidies, to provide technical assistance, and to provide the viability gap funding. Which, so we are, it's not surprising because we are an infrastructure company. We are involved across the whole funding spectrum as a big group. We are able to provide the funding across. I'll ask for the next slide in the interest of time. Yeah, key takeaways going not to repeat infrastructure. How you organize your business? Think about infrastructure. How are you going to grow the charging network? How are you going to fund the first 30 or 50 stations? And how are you going to fund the next 500 stations? That's a different way of financing. And so align the financing to the business model. If possible, I think talking about this, I know it hasn't happened yet, but including separating the actual entities. Equity used for risk. Equity is not good for the very large scale because you're basically diluting the owners and the founders by using low return revenues and high return equity. And then think about the infrastructure as an energy infrastructure. Like I said, think of it as a big, or even as a big, you can have a Pan-African platform, zero, for instance, thinking about going to 20,000 countries. And you can think of themselves as the utility as a major multi-country utility. And that changes your thinking about how you get funding. So that's thinking about $1 billion. Yeah, then partnerships with the authorities, with the municipalities, with the regulators, that has to come in. And I've seen people who work closely with governments from the beginning, starting to get advantage of this by their participation. Only influencing policy, for example, in these debates about interoperability. If you're not on the table, and you might be on the menu. Yeah, so I think that's it. The next slide will be a summary, a conclusion, which is basically saying the same things. And yeah, thank you very much. I'm sure there are no questions.
Thank you very much, James. I think we'll go back to the previous speaker. Brad Zhao from Ecobank. So just give a round of applause to Brad. I have pleasure of presenting to the fight. Where in the part of what we recognize, probably a very numbers and the Bible in the context of minutes, I should be able to at least reiterate everyone's finance or arguments. But also, as I did, so, you know, the next. Eating a little bit more that has been said. Also today, our mission as always we try to identify having that in our plans for sure. Evaluation induction. Planning about that the right one of finance our customers. Technically, how the mission staff as about the repairs, so they will know what's in balance. As we jump on to the next slide, try and mind it not as to why the balance. Right. And those are why we model here is thought that we have a very massive addressable market. Starting when you're looking at it, you will be actually better. All the people are really excited about it. And have to change, but it is probably the issue. Pricing as starting about the transfer, growth transfer, and largely what it's general for our customers, and it's why into the particular electric. From that down, that's next slide. Looking more deep dive into the actual address of the problems. We are really trying to see how we can take this graph and and visually for the next 10 years. The average of this 75% is penetration. Why we do all that like the weather are going to try to use but also put more money in the last investment. We jump to the next slide. We'll just make this here as a reminder of the benefits of the costs for it's the big one, probably for our customers. Why we believe of it. Okay, or of course, they got less maintenance upgrades and sizes now almost plus the last investment different legacy parts of the market. So down to the next slide. We'll now double down on black finance. It's interesting, and I was just so 90% of the finance. The number was actually specified up. So like all 90 the same version of financing is actually the better. But even as we mentioned, the single option. Our customers want the diversity of the cost of financing. The reason why we say that is we have everyday finance so available to them. Generally, to about 100 to 150, but we think much more. The one where the financing is very traditional. It is very difficult to get which are now actually do this. Our mission with the finance company will be able to lead work together with the customer, providing and having payments. And one thing is sales across the country within the electric device. It is slowly coming down as the market, but I'm saying financing is a big part of the provide across to next salaries. Big more numbers, just sort of clearly showing that petrol as electricity is a 25% customers, even as we look holistically on the payment costs and the ratio We compare to the combustion engine level, electric level, even after a huge saving for our customers. This is the real reason why I believe electric. The reason why we save this and that's what the mentioned. And jump for next time. I'd like to take another opportunity to communicate about why we believe that finance is not just about the money, about the ecosystem and driving about the consumers. One thing about the quality by most of it. But our additional the of the slide, so we're able to capture what the customer. Not just providing ownership of the bike, to get sure that the one allows it to develop a confident individual of the several. Actually provide you with medical benefits, physical aspects, and actually also giving you other uses to be able to test that all this aids towards understanding our customer and knowing that that's because scale will always ensure that those are different decisions. And the machine learning goes without you. That's to our customers. Actually able to us to provide flexible. Our mission for us is to have our customers. Pay as a program allows me to actually make very payments. A scenario where you're going to find real work. Actually, there's not a question. Once the back of their road, 24-hour is about it's a very good to ensure that there are no scenarios where we're chasing customers or looking at huge net amounts of dollars. And this is our Incopa advantage that allows us very customer centric, focus on a lot of data, but also realize that technology plays a big part in not only being able to capture and IoT capable service. But enable current customers to option, but to also enable us to ensure that none of our customers actually pay out huge reports that we all know the financing of the global base onto the channel. And as we jump to the next slide, I will touch a bit more about partnerships. Financing does not work in a silo. The ambition here is that we are catalytic foundation, but really helping apply our channels, our ecosystem. Our current supplier, and then as we expand, we should be positive, but rigorous how we proceed with our own partnerships. But we also want to leverage channels because we understand there are different segments. We understand that we have to be very blunt and direct different channels. From a right-handed platform level, we work with folks that are actually see the cost of the ownership of the balance the customer, but also help and more likely by being on a platform. We've always made the field probably have 70,000 agents across Kenya. That's an incident of actually is to be able to really reach a lot of people across the access sectors. Together we're also looking at things to do. Because when you think SME, we're not just thinking about a single level of development, we're also thinking about the business that are actually doing and these all customers. In the different channels, our data and this is trying to have pricing. We'll have to direct pricing depending on the risk of customer channels. That goes without saying the ecosystem will be sorted. We will always continue to provide medical insurance, comprehensive insurance, working with health and safety. And that's all to say that the image of our customers on the road, the root ownership, we will not have multiple companies, house, which is kind of the finance balance next to ensuring and with some of not just with the bike, the entire ecosystem that is on the road to build. As a jump to the next section. It's just giving you a bit more about what's been happening within the program so far. It's been about 3 years, so thinking with the best out to the community. You only finance of it. Thank you, everybody.
And as you see from the J curve there, the growth has been. But what I will mention, I'm going to like as I mentioned, like other speakers, is that supply will always be in question mark. As we always say, if you build them, we will sell them. That is our motto. And that graph should actually keep growing as we scale and as we try to supply and partners once we small. So on a customer level, we see great of customer, see additional income close to 30% with our customers. Every head survey single stock customer, 9 actually confirm the electric voting if the one of us. As we jump to the next slide. This slide just updates the precedent that we've seen growth in the number of partnerships in our market, seeing a lot of consistent players with clients together with them. But for us to actually get the 50% penetration, what is to happen? Why will supply markets and products within a Southway? Because supply will always with the market demand that comes with it, because capital. Capital just drives growth of supply. Supply will really help us in terms of people to expand the marketplace and to also provide more products. Which will always be support from government, so not have for years. Our ambition always I think that as the engagement of government will try to provide more alternative and more of the provision to actually help tax benefits for customers. Overall, the circular motion of having capital injected into the market, also having government enable us to provide more partnerships, use our growth in more markets, as mentioned, currently adjusted in Nairobi and Mombasa, and without around capture, but in many of that making a little constant. I will stop there and allow for any questions should there be. Thank you very much for attentiveness.
So, the African continent trade agreement is something, and some of which a lot of policy got very with promises to deliver loss in terms of business investment. Now, as a business, into lending and enhancing businesses, I just want to find out how do you decide which of the countries will be based on a lot of things like interest rates, because it is not for the regulations. Countries we look at what is the risk in investing in that's in Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, any of the countries that's and you look at regulation, the interest, the affordability, or what's how do you decide where you go to use the money? This money the business is able to.
Thank you for that. I will give you the smart answer and the short answer. The smart answer is to look at products. Because at the end of the day, it's a chicken and egg scenario. We as a corporate mobility only finance electric mobility. And therefore, first aspect you look at is supply position. There's no supply design numbers. The main one aspect. Other aspect is electric mobility to always be directly correlated. Electrification of the market. So we also have to look at the infrastructure in the market, then we be able to then sort of start around which market makes more sense. We then have to look at regulations that actually help promote which markets we have that. The short answer is to have a look at very five markets. So we almost already have a market with the approach, which is Kenya largely because that's where we've seen a lot of solution. But that doesn't stop us from expanding to other markets.
Thank you, Brad. And we have one speaker who has been following the conversation virtually. We try and reach them, they have a slot, so we'll skip them. For now, until the webinar format that is ready. But we'll move forward. To our next speaker, who was mostly the early stage of venture, helping them structure financing, secure investment, and avoid the mistakes that kill great products before they reach commercial scale. Please help me welcome Kelly Ruby.
I just want to find the contracting about school, how traffic. So I don't speak the time for that. But, okay, so I want in respect of the time, but you know, so position of marketing, the landscape of the financing. And I will talk about what is my experience with people and finance and other aspects where funders benefit when someone is what speed forecast for direct but as I believe we are German-based consulting company and buying the end of the access. The first one to our customers, we keep apply to practice and find out the areas of participation, finance for election. And then I want to solve that and tools that are just for the participants. It's what the second part of the and we don't like that. We do have a way that we can use content that is the market shape the next access for the business of the economic development. So I want to do the middle of the I want this confidence and also I want to consultants financial money and for that I want the one state developing project in Rwanda, allow Madagascar, Spain and others. And for that I wrote the management authority. So I will jump into it. Tech challenger, but very good. So I think we are almost all familiar with that. In the last 6 years or so, about 100 billion mobilization of the main African region. So we can include but I will not spotlight the view. But before I do that, I also have to sorry, I'm not taking it so this work we do. Yes, but I'll spotlight that some of which I will present. Yeah, we had Global, Hero announced that we have closed the management program completed with the plan run by the partner. Then next, of course, we have Rome. They announced the $1 million that was funded for President. The Africa one venture that from and there's a development finance. I was, take them a credit line. Then. Let's go, but one, for the last next, I think, of course, we were in the about the fact that we're going to and the company, so the fact that's going by, and I'm actually the financial. There's no more stuff in the chat, there's a couple slide, I never know how to pronounce that. Format for your team, and we have a venture company with some money. The deals that they will get out, give them, rate line. And we have to go ahead and check out the data. That is funded, what you feel like, the fund their report on, then you can find, and $3 million from that to be done by the development fund. Now, it is also fast, investment in from an upfront impact development fund. Most of them are applied to like or are owned by those outside countries, but then the dollar is quite expensive. Now, finally, fashion global invested in the maps, our material, the amount of the was sending on the wall, infrastructure across the country. Now, if we look at then accolades were now for $10 million from Europa, from Almighty Frank Lambert, and I think it was the formal grants for funding the Chinese infrastructure, but also the finance. So myself there, I did all and say that that's another money. So that we see the implementation, we're getting money from venture capital, we're getting money from they now even get money from PFI. But the story is now contribution helping that there is not enough. There is a big area and big about 270. We can not budget private one that we that's about 500 it needs the percent. The kind of scale employment that we're talking about. And second, talk about kind of three other that are about 208 companies. Most of them have the brand of a big increase of branding, brands following for the value of it. When you put us a branding for friends, family, and people who are the really and then now you need to complexity. That is where we're seeing the largest in terms of finances. I will go for like what are the actually looking at the finances. And I'm putting into the family of time books, then that's a good investment. And it's not only food, one after the other, there is to be but we will that does go. So, what financing? This is when you move to conclude. And it's a brand new brand of the bank loan, when you're taking mortgage to the house, and going for the program, and trusting all the bills. And now, we plan the proof of concept. It's generally for the situation. Then that's where you can possibly pay with it. As you can see, there are no longer actually such a definition of finance and investment, but I would like to find their needs. The fact that not income, the second that so the grant is that we have elected real PDP, foreign irrelevant investment fund, the one that about. So they it's grants, the government grants, companies, some of them have, for example, and the and then the second now, the unique thing about the physical, it's part of the grant data. need to see a movie process. It's very good grants were also part of the ethnic party president. But now grants are more and moving up. Actually, part of the party. They think they do not have a grant in the company. We must have done. We found that question in an organization. Now. But okay, that's it, good for them, for the quality of the country. I think we put it up, but then it's for very, very bad something. Grant funding. On the one side, whatever, for the rest of the price of where you want, but not the, even though you want spare for passports and so. And I will kind of keep that for grant funding. Then for the other, the action, the venture, sort of, and that is why one time I think that is a controversial question of how we feel. Because if they are going to exit, the investment will be. So we get it into it will easily go away. Now, but the idea is that it's not really just personally. So the key thing was the path and we see the current model. The next stage now is to the code stage. Again, just like the presentation, I believe that to this. So after moving on, the ISP branch that fund by the reason, we go and tax and great is that as I just have for the private much for the assets and then the next of Africa by any now if you go to that like and we say that I stage equity but there is a 7 year for range to a safe construction. By the time then especially the one the Europa and after by the IFC before the it's all of the investment fund. They are all of them are larger PMI, they are both catalyzed. So they are coming into the company knowing that if you are global, another investment from PMI or from commercial. So that's why the two that I like to see that then you know that this is a very different that a company is doing. What we look at is it is construction and assistance. So the other thing that all of parts of the variation. But I suppose it's the work was data today. I can have financial capability. Can have profitability, but also to create a system that they can see how they might think what we need in the market. And then this kind of also gives you some more vigorous future project higher and the fund we need to equal and so on. So and also for almost make sure panel and then we have the discussion. We had a question of the sector, which shows that there is some level of constitutional, not really or calculating the main state of administration is practice that different countries can make there, but there will be a so what they see is that it is done at the level of bank. So in our one United Front for Africa, runs for and TPP will share the media. Now, for this, what I say, for able to be used, but are interested to set up and be able to have the amount was very interesting, $10 million, $20 million. So you're talking manufacturing, all of them have an infrastructure. You're talking manufacturing, They are very retail as a kind of where they one lens and they buy the guys up. But here also the thing the much of have to be people. That's it. Now the only difference is the institution of people are to get commercial banks, of course, commercial banks outside I'm sure that they does. While this type of thing on the field can go as low as 9 to 10% of and I know that's equal. The downsides, most of the content is bigger currency, so we let dollar people out. So we can track much of that, but I think the ground in this type of where your political evidence or actually major the government do what they do. And the right of the currency growth for it. What it means, our current actually have some organizations that are very direct, actually able to connect with them. But that's not what that's the matter where the person is able to. And in terms of the banks that have current. So the interest is paid by us, but that's very exciting that the current that's in the countries. So that's I think the map. I don't know how much time I have, but I'm the first thing. It's conditional. The fact is that I want to use the funded by a number of European governments and government funds. And they fund, they're one of the few grant makers that fund like for the so I think that we can find the education, to I want to education out of it. But I want to have that the contact fund for the ground, even if it's like a small field. And then we also find the job. The girl of job sometimes one of the best, so I mean, they don't do that for the program, they can put it like that. They should make it, and I all try to make it now I think addition of and one for one. And you can see that I'm not only like focus. So when you stand up the photos to each they ask that kind of way are here with company. So I think that get spend a cash by that project, they keep it stable. From experience, that's why what's don't see one to be the bigger and better. And you don't have to contribute to the project that is the time. And like which they do cash flow by 7%, you can do it, but very fast, and I'm sure that you can see that here they expect that to be something. So the question is that's what comes. I will go my country. Now, the money that they funds can €200,000 all the way to $1 million. So you can do the change. Okay, apply for money for credit for it's only so these are some of the examples of e-mobility companies and partners. We have Instagram, what's the value of what I charge you from? 2023. It's the national of Tanzania, but so that type of one thing, sorry, I forgot to mention, you don't have this good company, we get this for a so you want to try something else. So like edge energy, because so like company, they want to pilot be there. We have SGB, this was Malawi, they wanted to put partnership with Qatar Energy, get outside charging station. There's solar power, this is to be partnership taken by partnership, they go for €5,000. Yeah, and also, I mentioned, I was right now, we talk about the, we go, and when I, the budget for up to, that was only when, and frustration of the sort of mix that we do find. They also correct. They offer the program, so like EEP has a form for applications that we work with, much, and I remember, then that's fine. So that's one. And then next is, I can check people that get for switch. And I want to put that get less, which is funded by GIZ and other European organization. And they offer, they are offering for locally owned company, the energy access rate. And this is what we call the 500 readiness support. So if I'm going to United States, locally owned, locally managed company, and we have a panel of independent advisory firm, but we then have organized those. If the room there is feedback, with ourselves, I don't know if they have somebody to do, they are not waiting for source to come. And the kind of support that is getting the offer is fundraising, financing, with that, financing. Number of things I need to run up about the student model, they don't have a funding, struggle, we need to obtaining for effort in terms of time, for the value of we need to contact that are more regularly for them. How to do the last thing for them. Then we don't what that countries not have something like that. And companies that are looking for minimum investment 500,000. So this is all right. Yeah. African version of the company will pay the rent and access federal capital. And then the second one is finance material. So this is a step up. Finance is going to get companies that are in large effort. So no limitation of ownership like African government or not. At the level of support of funding and pricing. So that is support for the price money and the financing data. And the amount investment 5 million all the way. And the project that are invested currently because I think project. But the company must have what it all the force and that and just the funding. So that is an example of here and then for first thing I want to in that substance, they can have 3 ways that they decide the first the direct perspective. They invested nothing that is fine at the stage company. And the one that I can also have something that what I try and they invest the investment in immobility so far. And then the other event to the next one, then a fund that by the airport. So that's $1 million that gives analysis funding for company and so the first round and finally there are constitution advisor that after they manage a crowd for me to work with other crowd letters to be as much so this is an advantage that also fund manager and their that we anticipate should direct but also the money fund that get us to sort of so that's so the second rate, that's what we kind of the formula by the 48% demand by 38%. Even if there's situations that are very much but 4% zero again. If we and $10 per those have the support, but also I think the cost of the question that what's the chance is that and where and there. That's everyone and try to ask questions or you can try to become other content. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Um, Very powerful insight on what investors really. We now moving to a final panel for the day. I hope you're not yet tired. So these are last conversation. As we set up the stage for the panel, during the morning session of registration, you're given a document with this included. We'd love to hear your feedback on the session for today. Please just take your time and fill in the details and comments. And then we can follow through again tomorrow on the same. Okay, now on to our panel conversation this evening. Looking at financing opportunities and challenges for e-mobility and charging infrastructure across Africa. The panel is going to be moderated by the beautiful Winnie Jogo of the CMA. Please put your hands together. So we need to the remainder of the panelists.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the last session of the day. Thank you so much for holding out. Promise to be this way into my work for days. My name is the budget manager at the Iron Public Foundation. That's a wealth and mobility companies in Kenya, and we do this together with GRZ and our monitor project. I will now introduce or welcome my panelists for the day. Some of them have spoken today, and they can introduce the ones that haven't. I'll start with Johannes, welcome. Thank you very much. Sorry. All right. Then I will move over to the Timber Brown, Prima, from the XC Group. Welcome to the stage. Move over to James Delcapa. Welcome to the stage. Brian Powell, General Manager at Coca. All right. I think most of you have taken presentations today on the realities of financing realities in mobility, but just only in Kenya, but everyone in the continent. So the aim of this panel is just to put those guys together in terms of the financing realities and also those as well as proprietary realities to terms of great points. We have great financing, but there's no buildings at that. So our aim is to just get together and have a discussion on that. So I think that is the first question, right? Understand from where you sit in the ecosystem, I'm sure it's different here. What are one or two factors that have significantly influenced the ability to attract financing? Not only from a financial perspective, but also from a governance perspective as well. And also in answers to the instrumentation. So I'll start with you, Brian.
Okay. So just to kick it off, from one perspective, we have seen, if we look at the flow website, it's actually transition from trying to actually help them that understand this is a logic, right? You actually really need people to have that where we actually have more demand than supply. So what is really driving the financing and really being able to show the potential of electric mobility, in particular the three aspects that are currently made. It's the fact that we've got from showing what a e-mobility and an e-bike is, we're actually really being able to have a list of customers who are in need of this bikes, and that essentially will drive the bikes. So demand will always essentially through supply, and that's essentially what we're seeing.
I will go back to work, this is for the side, and then what's the finance guys.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my name is Sam Salzburg, from Nexus. As Kelly has already introduced us, we are a energy and energy access consultant firm. And we have been supporting small local companies that are getting those finance readiness support. And one of the key things that I think we have seen across all of our support activities is that investors always look for data. So especially with these early stage companies, something they're often missing is the data points to prove to the investors that indeed the riders that they're having out on the streets making significant revenue. And so this is something that again we have been looking forward to support all those companies. As we are also in the energy access space, again, their data is key. And fortunately, especially when you look at the rural areas, mini grids, for example, we don't have access to a large host of data for those projects typically that we look at. So both customer data as well as the data on the assets themselves. And that's why as the next stage at the moment, for example, we are looking at combining the two aspects, combining e-mobility with mini-grids, basically bringing e-mobility to some of the rural areas. And again, one of the things that we're expecting there that investors will be looking out for is the data both on the energy access side, on the mini-grid side, but also the mobility side. And maybe just something else that I should mention in that respect is that it will be in order to scale the mobility in rural areas, again, to have that interlinkage of financing for both of those aspects at the same time. So both the energy access side, but also the e-mobility side. So again, it's not something that we can really look at in silos. We can't be financing electric motorbikes, for example, without financing at the same time the charging infrastructure. And this is even more critical in rural areas compared to the urban areas.
Thank you for that. Now I'll bring the next set of Dr. James. I think one of the key takeaways was infrastructure fast. So we have learning say the focus on very basic rural area, but also when it comes to the realities of what we've done in the space, for example, what have we been finding when it comes to infrastructure in the space and moving of areas as well. What are the good conclusions?
Right, thank you. So we do look at the first, the metrics, fast, but in time we do expect has to be critical to that, backed by data, has to be backed by research, backed by pilots, and you appreciate that a lot of it could be theoretical because they are fair analysis. Let's just try to very big things. So we do look at those, the normal financial metrics. We do look at the sustainable development index. We can do a calculation and develop a score because we are an impact investor. We're very important to have very good metrics. The leader has 4 good metrics on some of the sustainable development impact which the project will have, balance of social impacts, data impact, marginalized improved technical disability, economic transformation, the macro transformation of the region communities. We also look at the climate and what are the carbon emission reductions of that noise and temperature, air pollution, reduction of pollution effects. Those are the classic metrics that we look at. But I also want to point out that a couple of other important So one is a unit economics. And this is an area where we all have to get much better at. The unit economics help us see the path, break even the path, versus the and you know, if you question that a lot, you look at the reasoning behind, you look at all the information that can bring to bear, and making the unit economics just say, also myself, also by what's the revenue associated with that, or how many of those rights do you bring? What assumptions are we doing? What risk assessments are we doing? So that's a very important mention for us. If I don't want, I want to say, I don't want to go back up and anybody else, but this is an extremely important one. From the benefit of hindsight, and that is the founder fit. How is this person of this group of founders positioned to make this business work? We invest in difficult areas, that is in very high risk. So we look at the founder, what is the tenacity of this founder? What is the mental fortitude of the founder? The ability to navigate the complex regulatory structures, what is their ability to some shocks, things change, break up one day and maybe a rule comes on interoperability. So, I how I could navigate that. When you use a key license, we could have a case, not on this space, but maybe it's fixed. Somebody has a license, maybe it's in a certain place, then suddenly. How are you going to handle that? Are you going to be able to handle that? And it's a subjective thing, right? That went to that, which you got just before, and implement. I don't think I don't to say, oh, I can test the folks. Don't do that there, but maybe far from my practice. This is, the management of podcasts, succeed in business, and also very important thing. How passionate are they that we looking for the next really fun. On the next really fun of the way as years in this space. I think that we close like that. Yeah, it's
Thank you very much. Then I come back to that. I think for people, I say you solve the challenges, right? So it's not financing, not financing, and looking at starting project finance. One of the potential customers will be getting from us, kind of this, working with. So you're financing the space and also the tax financing, what exactly makes your decision to finance, either, project and innovations company or market financier, what is one or two factors that drive this?
If a few comments as far as mobility is new. Yeah. And just as the companies are ensuring financing for the system. And just as in the space, things happen at the beginning that weren't necessarily indicative of what will happen after. So at the beginning, a few years ago, we had startup companies put out pitch decks that were ridiculously unrealistic in terms of your growth curves. But investors who invest in early stage companies want to hear them. So they invested. And of course, those curves didn't materialize. And the industry paid for that way, because then the more sane investors space, certainly in space, said, wait a minute, you haven't hit your numbers from your pitch deck. We want to wait and see what happens. But I think, we've got beyond that, and there's real traction, real data as mentioned. Jane, we're sort of in a reverse situation. You said everything now that I would say, basically. But I want to highlight a few critical things. Absolutely, even though we're not equity invested, debt instruments primarily, we still take an equity view of the companies and we are investing in the management. So that is first and foremost what we look at. The second thing, look at, I underscore again, what Jane said. Unit economics don't work, then the business plan's garbage. Sorry. And, you know, we've had several instances where after due diligence, we realized that, you know, what was in the financial model ain't what's really happening. And the third thing we look at is traction. So we're not the financier who will come in for the early stage companies, just not set up to do that. We're providing instruments for growth companies. So we want to see how well have you managed your supply chain for the course of the years you've been in business. If you have new OEM suppliers where you need some time to get comfortable and how you manage those relationships and how those relationships produce the company. And second, we need some longer scale. Scale is relative. You know, need to submit a company has 1,000 or 2,000 bikes. Great, but you know, they need to have a 300 for we have the confidence that this company is really getting meetings.
I think now I agree, but there needs to be a discussion when it comes to supporting early stage companies. I think James has raised a critical point for the founder and it was very in the fashion and it's that what's response in terms of what exactly that's in the attraction as well as the economic. So that is for the early stage companies that can rush to approach by the bringing up data as well as having that mindset that the investor can pursue.
So, I mean, one of the things is that I would actually second that point is what we have seen is that the passion of the founders is extremely important and also the willingness to go the extra mile. What we often do when we first engage with a company is to actually ask them what it is exactly that they're doing. Because when founders are so passionate and there's so much involved in their space, very often they do a very vast and diverse range of activities that are not necessarily focused and that are not necessarily bringing the company towards like a single goal. But they do this because sometimes they feel that the only way to get revenue is to actually diversify. Because one day they may be told that, okay, you have an e-mobility bicycle company, why don't you also sell little charging ports that work together with the battery on the e-bike, and so they start getting involved in the little charging ports with the little like power banks, for example. And then they start wondering, okay, now I need to have the charging infrastructure as well. So they get involved in the charging infrastructure, but very often these companies, like I said, almost too diversified at a very early stage to the extent that they're losing focus on what they're doing. So again, one of the things that we do with all these companies at the beginning is to really try to highlight what the focus of the company should be, and then set clear targets and clear goals towards that. And I also want to re-emphasize the point of the unit economic and possible exponential growth. Again, what we have seen makes a lot more sense is if already at the early stage companies
can demonstrate profitability on a unit scale, and also can demonstrate that they can grow organically and not exponentially, they will actually be more successful in the long term. I have myself in the past worked for an exponentially growing company that is unfortunately no longer. I mean, it has still there, they're growing themselves, so it's something different now, but I do want hopefully the sector to move away from this, again, looking for the next unicorn, but actually funding small companies that are already at a smaller scale, because that's likely to indicate that they will equally grow when they grow.
Thank you. Now I'm going to Brian, mentioned that likes to get 50% penetration. Mentioned that capital is very integral to your business. And so which type of financing would help and provide to create that same by 50%, but also scaling to other markets?
I've always said that asset financing is a very interesting problem. And the reason for that is, the one hand, we're building demand, we're going to the market, we're looking at customers in the field and really selling the value proposition, which is actual daily service for the customers. And from that, we're then able to look for financing that is supply. But on the other hand, we also have to accept the fact that that demand can only be balanced out by having just a little supply. So even as asset finance companies really venture into trying to be able to grow the balance sheet and the financing to provide these assets to our customers, and we also have to get very creative in how it's supported. Because at the end of the day, yes, it is a very large market. We have multitude of everyone is in the market. But at the end of the day, we also have to realize, there's one who mentioned this, which is the fact that our customers are very rational and they value, essentially value for the asset, not just the price. And in so doing, then means that in a world of 24 different types of bank providers in the market, there will always be that 3-4 households. And in so doing, that a lot of what we try to do now is try and leverage the demand and the offtake, really being able to support our suppliers, getting the packet financing, support them to actually grow that segment.
Just briefly going to the discussion when it comes to supply finance. What are the areas that you see that you can support players like Agriculture and looking at ties and getting substantial amounts of partners in India, for example. I would say that they know, but probably in Kenya, but also in other countries. What are some of the things that you see?
Before I answer that one, point that I forgot to make, investors are always looking back winners. And winners, meaning not only individual companies, but business models that they win. And we believe differently. We believe that the population of motor riders, or drivers, are not monolithic, right? So that means that there's not one business model to win. We've moved in this space where there's 30 million motor riders on the continent. But that's a lot. That's a big market, right? They don't all think alike, right? Some of them are going to want to buy a bike with batteries, and some of them are going to want to buy a bike and swap batteries. Some of them will think that it's just plain and well that they're saving $2 a day, and some will think, well, the guys who are swapping the batteries must be earning $5 a day. So the point is, and I say this, I think to the investors, be open-minded that there could be 6 different business models that are winners. You don't have to think that there's just going to be one. And in terms of supply finance, as I mentioned earlier, as we've been negotiating, them the other asset ministers space, the linchpin or trade finance is certainty of getting paid a limited amount of time. And the only way to get that certainty is knowing that the off-taker, whether it's Echo or what, or others, Fortune Credit, or absolutely positively gonna buy those 1,000 bikes that we just financed. They're gonna buy them within 12 months or less. And the only way to get there is with, absolutely viable that purchase orders. And working on that, a couple of months ago, came to us and said, we realize that there's a supply problem. We wanna achieve our goals in the market as an asset financier. How can we get supply, what we do? And so we're engaging very positively and trying to do that. And he took some time off, so there was a blip in our negotiations, but we're back at it. I'm sure we'll be coming, forward with great news, by the end.
Thank you. Now to get to James, especially when it comes to charging infrastructure, I think that it's a high, not only for the electric two-wheelers, but it's for four-wheelers. What type of investments, for example, do you see more critical to this space, especially when it comes to seeing charging infrastructure? And what are you seeing, what are the factors that you consider when investing in infrastructure finance? Infrastructure players relative to the merchants and infrastructure.
Yeah, as mentioned, infrastructure is a long term. It's like heavily integrated, requires take care of roads, requires planning, it requires partnerships, like I mentioned, government, regulators, already own type of infrastructure like gas stations. And sometimes we do co-investment with them actually to partnership to share the companies and others that they about. It requires long-term planning, requires that you address the risks, including the risk of interoperability, depending on which side of that divide you are. Perhaps alliance with their tax, special tax, probably about that. So for infrastructure, it's about long-term thinking, about partnerships, it's about identifying risks, it's about making the synergies, the economies of scale. I mentioned earlier the tariffs. The products you get to make that infrastructure. You are 20 charging stations, of course, you're lucky you pay a commercial tariff. You have 50 always construction machine, that's your tariff. You may need help in terms of the other build out, need blended finance and element of grants. So that's you are able to write that value where you're building infrastructure without the income coming in. It's a good step out to the next scale. You need to look at automation, and right now, the automation for cabinets. And I think may have gone all the way to 50 or 100 stations, and then you are like, oh, automated evidence. So how it's so far. I've seen some programs providers of the grants, okay, it's okay, afterwards, I'm getting some. So at least the pilots. Evidence. So, yeah, that, but if you had thought about medical government, have initiative, then probably would not be to a lot, and do the program to make this last. So, very strategic into long term development.
There is, I think I would like to perspective when it comes to the global landscape. What type of financing programs would you like to see, whether that's for infrastructure and or environmental mobility solutions? How exactly can this be diversified? What specific financing models do you see back in the states?
Again, and before I go to that, I did hear, I think from somebody earlier today, that said that we can make mobility work in the urban areas, we simply, transfer that to the rural areas thereafter. I don't think that it's as easy as that. I think that rural areas are completely different to urban areas. The use cases are different. So of course we don't have endless numbers of rural areas in the rural areas. You have people wanting to transport goods from the farms, which again is different to the urban areas. You have very different roads, infrastructure, much more bumpy, much more muddy and dirty. Even in terms of operations and maintenance, well, mobility companies themselves, it's very different because if a bike breaks down in the city, it's easy to locate a technician. It's easy to find somebody to fix that. Where are you going to find that technician in the rural area? So already from there, you know that the bike itself needs to be built differently. The bike itself needs to be built for being able to be fixed by local only. So if the tail light breaks or whatever, it should be someone in the rural area that should be able to fix it. Similarly, the cost of power, of course, in rural areas is different, especially if we look at off-grid areas. I saw earlier here a tariff mentioned that the new tariff in Kenya that you get from KPLC is $12 per kilowatt hour. Now the typical mini grids that is in an off-grid area charge something like $14 per kilowatt hour. So again, there's a big question around whether e-mobility can work under that type of tariff. Right, and this means that, of course, in terms of the financing, what we need is financing that considers all of these aspects. Unfortunately, there are large-scale programs that are coming up, or that are already in the works. For example, there's the Mission 300 program that aims to electrify 300 million people of the World Bank and African Development Bank, and under that, number of mini grids will be built out. Of course, they're mainly bringing grant component there, which again will need to be supplemented by debt and equity. But yeah, I simply want to state, I think that again, when we look at the rural areas, let's not just think that we're basically just copy-pasting what we're seeing in the urban areas, but we need approaches that are specific to those rural areas.
I'll ask one final question to Brian. Given what Yonis has raised on going to the rural areas, what exactly will the asset financing consider in terms of creating value for the customers that come to the company for financing?
Thank you. I'd like to mention one key aspect that generally companies that in particular and proper we think about, and that is, if the customer, and in this case, this is the license taking a little, is not thinking to try to become from a low, this will not work for any organizations, because at the end of the day, 3 years in, and looking at, leaps and bounds that we see. Because there has been progress, we see lots of new entrants, prices of bikes are coming down, the cost of electricity very different areas. One particular focus that in the real, more expensive. Yes, the unit economics of the customer, regardless of whether we're in the urban center or in the rural setting, needs to issue. With that, then you can have the question of the history. In the rural setting where densification of shopping may not, maybe the initial offset make money first or higher. So it begs the question then, does the shopping or the charging at home? But ultimately, from the asset financing level, what we really want to ensure is that our customers are happy. And much as what we do will impact and help the climate, we have to be very honest with ourselves and knowing the fact that our customers will do negative costs. Would that make sense? Was a whether we're a commercial urban setting or rural setting, then it will go.
All right. I would like that, the session is over, but we had to, in the open, so one practical change that would strengthen the mobility financing in the context, specific context of that. And I'll ask everyone the panelists to speak.
But I still have in mind, I think, good first. I would that look at. If you look at how the bikes have grown in the last several years, and the fact that we have all these organizations and we also had to this world. Even that catapult to the economies of scale. And grow.
Leveraging partnerships, I think, is absolutely critical. Any companies in the space sorted out, saying we're gonna be an OEM, we're gonna run charging stations, we're gonna run the finance and operations. So do what you do best, and form partnerships and create leveraging situations to help the sector grow.
At the risk of repetition, I would say to really look for optimal early stage companies that make things work at a small scale. And then help those grow rather than looking for the next unicorn.
I agree, that's true, but growth mindsets. Forecast, yes, but flexibility. To to work on basics that I like to work on activities that I like to. Stay focused, have a plan to scale. But look at the unit economics and never lose your passion.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I think that was the end of our finance session. Thank you very much for your time.
Have a round of applause to the panelists. Thank you very much. This has been the final session for today. Before we fully wind up, we have one request. That we would like to take a group picture for today's event. So we'll just do it at the stage after the following instructions. And yeah, as we get set up, first of all, I want to thank you every speaker, panelists, and participants for today's session. We have had honest conversations today. We have seen the full picture, the opportunity, the pressure points, the partnerships needed to scale e-mobility. I think the one partnership and collaboration has been mentioned several times. The mission is clear. More isn't about defining the vision, it's about accelerating the execution. So for now, let's shift into the most underrated part of this summit, which is a network session that's going to happen at the first floor. So we have a cocktail network session that's the first floor. Please join us there and continue the conversation. But before we go there, have a group picture right here. So we encourage other leaders to join us here. The photograph of the group picture, and then we can head the network section at the first floor. Then you can leave at your own leisure. Please remember to fill this in for us and bring it to the tomorrow, or you can leave it at the registration desk. For those that have done. Thank you very much and enjoy your evening. So let's have a problem. Picture. Yeah, it's here. So just take the good picture. Then somebody proceed. Where is the camera? Swing it up here.